In 1956, when British Railways unveiled its final steam locomotive design, the boardroom erupted in laughter. One investor called it a monument to yesterday. Another dismissed it as building a steam dinosaur while the diesel age roars past. The chief financial officer demanded to know why shareholders' money was being thrown at obsolete technology. The locomotive hadn't even turned a wheel, and its obituary was already written. 50 years later, that same dinosaur was still running. The locomotive was Evening Star, the last steam engine built for British Railways, and the final member of the standard class 9F freight design. Its construction number was 92,220. Its working life would outlast the diesel locomotives that were supposed to replace it, the modernization plan that condemned it, and the very railway system that built it. But Evening Star's story isn't about nostalgia or sentimentality. It's about engineering decisions that defied financial logic and proved correct for reasons no spreadsheet could capture. The Britain of 1956 was racing toward diesel. The modernization plan of 1955 had allocated £1.6 billion to eliminate steam within 15 years. New diesel locomotives were being ordered by the hundreds. The government wanted efficiency, the public wanted progress, and steam represented neither. Yet in the workshops at Swindon, engineers were still refining the 9F design. The class had been introduced only 5 years earlier in 1954, specifically for heavy freight work. These weren't romantic express engines. They were workhorses, designed to haul 900-ton coal trains up steep gradients, to operate in all weather, to run millions of miles with minimal maintenance. When Evening Star emerged from Swindon Works on March 18, 1960, it was the 999th locomotive built there since 1946. It was also the last steam locomotive British Railways would ever construct. The timing seemed absurd. Diesel production was accelerating. Steam's death warrant had been signed. Building one more steam engine appeared as rational as forging swords in the age of gunpowder. The criticism wasn't entirely unfounded. Steam locomotives required extensive infrastructure, coal stages, water towers, ash pits, specialized workshops. They needed frequent servicing. They were labor-intensive. Every argument favored diesel. But the critics missed something fundamental. The 9F class, and Evening Star in particular, represented decades of accumulated steam engineering knowledge compressed into a single design. Every weakness identified in earlier locomotives had been addressed. Every efficiency gain had been incorporated. The result was a machine that, within its domain, performed with a reliability that early diesels couldn't match. Evening Star's boiler operated at 250 pounds per square inch, high pressure for a British design. Its cylinders were 20 inches in diameter with a 28-inch stroke. It produced 39,667 pounds of tractive effort. These weren't record-breaking numbers. They were practical specifications, chosen for dependability rather than drama. The locomotive weighed 86 tons without its tender. Fully loaded with coal and water, the total was 140 tons. It could haul freight trains of nearly 1,000 tons unassisted. On passenger duties, which it occasionally performed, it could maintain 90 miles per hour. More importantly, it was designed for ease of maintenance. The 9F incorporated roller bearings throughout, self-cleaning smoke boxes, and rocking grates that allowed ash to be dropped while moving. These weren't revolutionary features individually. Collectively, they reduced servicing time by nearly 40% compared to older designs. Evening Star entered traffic in May 1960, allocated to Cardiff Canton Depot. Its primary duty was hauling coal from the Welsh valleys to the docks at Barry and Newport. These were the unglamorous trains that actually made railways profitable. Heavy, slow, essential. The locomotive worked. It worked reliably. It worked cheaply. And it kept working while the modernization plan began to unravel around it. The diesel locomotives that were supposed to replace steam had problems. Not all of them, certainly, but enough to create operational chaos. New designs suffered teething troubles. Some classes had endemic mechanical failures. The modernization plan had rushed into diesel production without adequate testing, and British Railways was paying the price. Maintenance depots lacked diesel expertise. Spare parts supplies were uncertain. Some diesel classes proved so unreliable they were withdrawn after only a few years of service. Meanwhile, steam locomotives like Evening Star simply continued their duties. The irony became impossible to ignore. The obsolete technology kept the trains running while the modern replacement sat in workshops awaiting parts or expertise that didn't exist yet. Evening Star's operational costs were documented meticulously. During the early 1960s, it averaged 3.8 pence per mile in running costs, coal, water, lubrication, and routine maintenance. Contemporary diesel freight locomotives averaged 4.2 pence per mile when all factors were included. The steam locomotive, derided as inefficient, was actually cheaper to operate than its replacement. Part of this equation was infrastructure. British Railways had spent decades building a comprehensive steam support network. Every depot had coal, water, and steam maintenance facilities. Converting to diesel required massive investment in new infrastructure, while the old infrastructure became redundant. In the transition period, maintaining both systems was extraordinarily expensive. Evening Star simply used what was already there. The locomotive also benefited from timing. It entered service just as British coal prices dropped. The coal industry was desperate for customers as diesel and electric power reduced demand. Steam locomotives became cheaply fueled at precisely the moment their replacement was supposed to eliminate them. By 1963, the modernization plan was being quietly revised. The target date for steam elimination was pushed back. Some diesel classes were being withdrawn prematurely, and locomotives like Evening Star continued hauling freight with unspectacular but essential reliability. But Evening Star's significance extended beyond economics. The locomotive had been built with ceremonial attention. It was painted in lined green livery, passenger engine colors, not the unadorned black typically given to freight machines. It carried a copper-capped double chimney. Brass nameplates on each side read, "Evening Star," in elegant serif letters. British Railways had built it as both a working locomotive and a monument, the final statement of steam engineering achievement. This attention wasn't purely sentimental. Evening Star was preserved from the moment it was built. British Railways knew it would be historically significant. The locomotive was maintained to higher standards than operational necessity required. It was assigned to duties that kept it visible and relevant. In 1965, when steam elimination accelerated, Evening Star was withdrawn from regular service. It had operated for only 5 years in traffic, a fraction of the typical 30 to 40-year working life expected from a steam locomotive. The decision seemed to validate the investors' laughter. The Dinosaur had been a short-lived experiment after all, but withdrawal from British Railways service wasn't the end of Evening Star's story. It was transferred to preservation immediately. No rotting in a scrapyard, no languishing in a siding awaiting the cutter's torch. Evening Star moved directly from operational railway to museum collection, specifically the National Collection. And then, in 1974, something unusual happened. British Railways asked for Evening Star back. The oil crisis had driven fuel prices to unprecedented levels. Diesel operation became extremely expensive. British Railways was exploring every option to reduce costs, including returning preserved steam locomotives to service for special duties. Evening Star was inspected, found to be in excellent condition, and returned to active service. The locomotive that investors had mocked as obsolete in 1956 was working again in 1974, 18 years later, because it was more economical than diesel. Evening Star ran excursions and special services throughout the mid-1970s. It hauled freight trains when diesel fuel allocations were tight. It operated passenger specials when enthusiasts were willing to pay premium prices for steam travel. The locomotive proved adaptable, reliable, and surprisingly relevant. This second career lasted until 1981, when Evening Star was finally retired to permanent museum status. It had been in operational condition for 21 years after being declared obsolete before construction. The Dinosaur had outlasted many of the diesel locomotives built to replace it. But even retirement wasn't the end. Evening Star has been restored to working order multiple times since 1981. It operates heritage railway services, mainline excursions, and special events. In 2010, 50 years after its construction, the locomotive hauled a charter train at 75 miles per hour through the English countryside. As of today, Evening Star remains in operational condition. The locomotive, built as an anachronism, has been working intermittently for over 6 decades. Many of the diesel locomotives that were supposed to replace it have been scrapped. The modernization they represented has been superseded by further modernization. Electric trains now dominate British Railways, and still, occasionally, Evening Star runs. The investors who laughed in 1956 weren't wrong about the future. Diesel and electric traction did replace steam. The age of coal-fired locomotives ended exactly as predicted, but they were wrong about Evening Star specifically, and wrong about the nature of obsolescence itself. Evening Star succeeded because it represented the culmination of a technology, not its beginning. It incorporated 150 years of steam locomotive development. Every inefficiency had been addressed. Every improvement had been implemented. The locomotive was, in a sense, perfect, not innovative, but perfected. This made it valuable in ways that financial projections couldn't capture. When new diesel locomotives failed, Evening Star's proven reliability became precious. When fuel prices fluctuated, its flexibility became strategic. When heritage railways emerged, its historical significance became commercial. The locomotive also benefited from preservation culture that didn't exist in 1956. The idea that steam locomotives would become tourist attractions, that people would pay substantial money to experience obsolete technology wasn't anticipated. Evening Star was built at the exact moment when railways were transitioning from transportation infrastructure to cultural heritage. It occupied a unique position, the last of its kind, built to the highest standards, immediately preserved, and therefore available for every subsequent generation to experience steam operation. This wasn't the original plan. British Railways built Evening Star as a working freight locomotive. The ceremony and attention were addendums, in late editions by people who recognized historical significance. But those additions, the green paint, the brass nameplates, the careful maintenance, proved more valuable than the locomotive's original freight duties. Evening Star became more important after it stopped being economically necessary. Its value shifted from transportation to representation, a tangible connection to an entire era of engineering. This transformation, from tool to symbol, allowed the locomotive to remain relevant long after its technology became obsolete. The investors who dismissed Evening Star as a steam dinosaur weren't seeing the complete picture. They calculated return on investment based on freight tonnage and fuel efficiency. They couldn't predict oil crises, diesel failures, or heritage railways. They didn't imagine that people in the 21st century would pay premium prices to ride behind a steam locomotive. Most of all, they didn't understand that some machines transcend their original purpose. Evening Star was built to haul coal. It became a monument to steam engineering. It was constructed as obsolete technology. It became a working museum piece. It was dismissed as yesterday's mistake. It's still running today. 50 years after those investors laughed, Evening Star had proven them both right and wrong. Right about steam's inevitable replacement. Wrong about this particular locomotive's value and longevity. The diesel age did arrive, exactly as predicted, and the dinosaur outlasted it, still steaming into a future those investors never imagined.